So welcome. We are so glad that you're here tonight on behalf of our library director, Dr. Mark Winston, and assistant director, Joanne Simone. We're pleased that you were able to join us tonight. We're very excited about this program. We are really looking forward to hearing about the role that Crozer Seminary, the city of Chester, and the greater Philadelphia area played in Martin Luther King's life. And we're pleased to have Patrick Parr with us all the way from Japan. And he is joining us. I think it's actually early tomorrow morning, if my time zones are correct here. And then Reverend Dickens is going to be speaking a bit as well. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I am going to turn the virtual floor over to Patrick Parr.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? I probably look like a fighter pilot a bit with these earphones on, but or just a pilot. Anyway, thank you for joining me today, and thank you, Susan, and the Crozer Library for organizing all this. I'm also really looking forward to hearing from Reverend Dickens later. So. Hopefully we can all get all this going and the Zoom technology can work, and that's it. I thought I'd start a little bit with just how I came in with this book and how I brought it all together. It started probably about December 2012, and that was when I was trying to put together a list of portraits for historical figures who were 22 years old. And one of them was Martin Luther King Jr. And when I was researching his life at that age, I realized there was very little at that time that I could really use, any sort of primary data. It was very hard to find. So I decided to keep digging, keep looking into archives and so forth, and it turned out to be very difficult. So I thought, well, I need to interview. I need to find people who are still with us. So I decided to focus sharply on the Crozer community, and anyone who was a student with King or anyone who was with King at that time. That's who I focused on, and all my efforts and my money at that time, because I was not, this is my first book, so I was not under a contract. I was doing everything pretty much out of pocket. And my wife and I, we were living in Seattle at the time, and when we started this, and my wife and I thought, well, we need to get on the ground. We need to go to Chester. We need to knock on doors and pretty much throw ourselves into the community, whether they want us to be there or not. And so I came and I started to find people. The person I would say who really made this book was I can proudly say he's a good friend of mine now. His name's Dr. James Bashai, and he's still with us in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and he's in his mid-90s, but his memory is better than mine, I would say, right now. And what Dr. Bashai, or I call him Jimmy, what he was able to show me and tell me about the Crozer Old Main Building and about his time living with Martin Luther King, it blew my mind. It really did. And I thought, I need to pursue this project until until no stone has been left unturned. So that's what I did. And for the next 4 years, about almost 5, I interviewed people, including Betty Moitz, who was King's girlfriend during his time at Crozer. I think we have time at the end, right, Susan, for questions, if anybody has questions about who I interviewed. And I don't want to go too far into that because I have so much content to tell you about the Chester area today. But what I did end up doing is put all this together into a book. But by that time, I finished the draft. My wife and I were living in Pasadena, California, and I was teaching at the University of Southern California. And we had a potential publisher. We sold this book without an agent, but we didn't sell it yet at 2017. We had this kind of a in-between agreement with a publisher, but it wasn't working out, and we had been drawn back to Japan in 2017. And I had had a lot of work left to do, to be honest with you. And it involved the churches of Chester, which is why it makes today so exciting for me, because I get to finally share very directly with, especially those of you who are here in the Zoom chat, who are living in Chester or in the area. I can show you just how much King was involved in the Chester community and how much he put himself into those churches and the culture. So when my wife and I left from America to Japan, we still did not have a publisher for this book. And we finally found a great publisher, the one who did it, Chicago Review Press, and they gave us the deal while we were living in Japan. And I had told Chicago, I had said, well, I would like to be more in contact with some people in Chester to make sure that everybody knows the material that's in this book. But now here we are in 2021, and I'm finally getting a chance to do that, thanks to Susan Waller and thanks to the library. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen here, Susan. Let's see how this goes. All right.
While Patrick's sharing his screen, I just want to tell you a little bit about the book. It was released in April 2018 by the Chicago Review Press, the Wall Street Journal calling it original, much needed, and even stirring. Pulitzer Prize-winning author David Garrow wrote that The Seminarian is without question the most original and important book about King's life to appear in more than a quarter century. And The Seminarian was named a finalist for the 2019 Washington State Book Award.
Yeah, fancy stuff when you say it all together, eh? All right, this is, I hope people can see my cursor. I think it's important that you see my cursor because this is kind of a pandemic era tour of the Chester area that I'm going to try to give you guys. And this has all come courtesy of interviews of people who lived with King. See where I'm circling this window? That's where he lived. This is where King spent 3 years of his life, right here, this window. And this picture I took myself in 2016. I'll show you a picture a little bit later. But you see, this is the commemoration sign by the Historical Commission, and this is Old Main. Some of you are probably very sharp local historians, so if I say anything that is incorrect, I hide behind my book because I am far more a writer than I am a public speaker. So let's just make sure that you give me a chance to correct myself. Up here, this is the cupola, and up here in the cupola, this is where Civil War signatures were put all along the walls here. So you can actually go all the way up the steps, and then, as I did, and you can see these very old 1862, 1863 signatures of soldiers, probably both Union and Confederate, but this building was used mainly during the Civil War as a hospital for Confederate soldiers. And there's a lot more to that that I can tell you. But on this first floor you see right here, this is where all the classes took place on this side. And on the other side, this is where all the offices were for the president and for the dean. The second floor is where everybody, the single students lived. Okay. And the third floor was for a while where married students would stay. And you can imagine how close everybody was. And to make it even closer, there were no locks on the door. So nobody really, everybody had to be social, communicative with each other. They had to not hide, but to bond, so to speak. And King was right here. And down here is the first floor. And then down here in the basement, this is where he would eat. And everyone would eat. And over here would be the recreation room where they played pool and smoked. And yeah, enjoyed themselves immensely in the rec room. And this is also at times where Betty Moitz would come visit her mother, and they would talk in the basement area. I think, yeah. All right. So yeah, this is the old main building. I could go on for an hour just talking about this one picture, but we'll keep moving on here. How's that coming out, Susan, if I scroll? Is it okay? I hope. This is a picture of Old Main in the 1940s. You can see now there's trees. Hey, trees. Those trees are not there anymore. And behind here, you had where the professors lived. And let me see if I can get, yeah. So one fun thing is that the one professor here was named Morton Scott Enslin, and the students were on the second floor here, and they could see when Enslin would come out of his house to come into the building, and he was very late sometimes for class, and he would have a pipe, and they kind of thought of him as a train coming with a pipe, you know, with the smoke coming up as he walked. So you can kind of imagine some of the professors just waking up, coming out of bed, coming right out of their house and coming in to teach right on this first floor. Also right here, you'll see that this is the chapel. This is where they were able to have service weekly. And King was a big part of that, especially his second year. And this is also where another professor lived. This is Commencement Hall. Okay. And a lot of this is in my book, but I just wanted to share it visually with you so that it can kind of register a bit more. Okay. Let's see here. I'll just try to get this up. Right now, that's what it looks like. Everybody knows. I'm not going to spend too much time. Sorry, I stretched the image. This looks quite large, this area, but I want to mention, as I did a couple years ago, how abandoned and how worn down this building is. And if you have a chance, contact someone in the community and ask them to look into who is owning this building right now, because it was with the medical center. And feel free, if anyone has already done any enterprising efforts and you know the owner of this building in 2021, it's fallen into different areas of ownership. So I would love to hear an update. It's hard to get one, especially when you're in Japan. Okay. All right, here we go. So this is some stuff that maybe was overlooked in the book, but I wanted to put it here. I apologize for this very stretched map, but I will also send Susan a list of where all of these places are so that everybody can check them out. That's the Crozer Old Main building. Look for the green logos here. We'll be talking about Temple Baptist, Grace Community United Methodist Church, and also down here, St. Daniel's and the wonderful Calvary Baptist Church. All right. No favorites though, no favorites. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good, I've got them all. So we start here with good old Calvary Baptist Church. And it has been confirmed that King was here on March 9th, 1949, and he preached a sermon, and it was called Facing Life's Inescapables. And this sermon is very, I'd say, traditional in its style. And when I visited, the Reverend there was Bayard Taylor, and he recorded this once, and he did put it up on YouTube, but I couldn't find the recording. But the majority of the script is also in the book. And at this time, Reverend J. Pius Barber was his mentor, was King's mentor. And this is during a time in King's life when it was a bit difficult to be a student, and he was trying to find his voice. He was still not a very good preacher at this time. I know it might be shocking for people to hear that, but not yet, not yet. He had a wonderful voice, of course, and that could cover up a lot of the deficiencies he had at the time. But he was just growing into himself at this point in his life. So if you're a Chester resident, you can really tell anybody about King, oh yeah, he grew up here. He became a preacher. He became someone of authority behind the pulpit. And a lot of that started with Reverend Barber. So at this time, while he was with Reverend Barber and as a mentor, he also had another professor, and his name was Robert Caton. And Robert Caton and Barber, they're very different in the way that they interacted with King at this time. And Caton didn't really appreciate the Southern accent as much, you could say. And Caton wanted King to be a bit more of a Northeast liberal preacher with that inflection that was a bit, well, much drier, I guess you could call it. That's probably a negative word, but I think you understand what I mean. So, a little bit more rigid, but proper and formal. And whereas Barber wanted him to more engage with both the Black community and the white community of congregations. I think Reverend Barber would have been very happy that King had both himself as a mentor and also Caton. And these two sides of King really come through during this year. So this one's my favorite. Oh, I love this. Please, if you remember anything from this talk, please let it be this. All right. So he turns 21 at Grace Methodist Church. And this is off of 1213 Central Avenue. Okay. There's a footnote or an endnote in the book. And this is how the church appears. At least this is a kind of an older one. I hope it's still standing. King had his birthday, his 21st birthday, at Grace Methodist Church. And what I put in the book is that I feel he preached a sermon called "What is Your Life's Blueprint?" And he was speaking to young people that day. And he was already a member of the devotions committee at Crozer. He was a chair. And one quote I want to just remember is, or read here, is something King said during his sermon. King said, "Don't allow anybody to pull you so low as to make you hate them." And don't allow anybody to cause you to lose your self-respect to the point that you do not struggle for justice. And I like those words very much, and I think if King often spoke to young people around the Chester area as sort of this intermediary. He was at a good age. He was 21, speaking to kids who were between the ages of, you could say, 9 to 14, and giving them this positive message to work hard and try to make society better. I feel it's an important message. So he turned 21. He was working on his birthday. I should also mention back here one little thing about Calvary. While he was giving this sermon, he was taking the public speaking class from Caton, and his grade was a C. So if you would like, if any of you out there are taking classes and you end up getting a C in public speaking, you could say, well, I got the same grade as Martin Luther King at seminary. So it's just an interesting fact for everybody. All right, here's the next one. All right, I pulled all of these images off of Google, full disclosure. These are all as recent shots as I could get. I hope these, and if anybody is listening right now and you have something to correct me or update me with, please feel free during, I guess, the Q&A. This is Fifth Presbyterian Church. It's now called the Thomas M. Thomas Memorial Presbyterian Church. And March 5th, 1950 is when King attended this church. It was during Men's Day. And this was probably right around when King was lobbying to become student body president at Crozer. He also preached here again the next year. So this was he at least preached here twice. And you can, let's see, I believe I have the date here. Yeah, it was in February of the next year. Okay. All right. This is Temple Baptist Church. And this was in January 28, 1951. And he was invited to speak here by Reverend D.W. White. And it was an afternoon service. And at this time, he had arrived as a student body president. That sounds very impressive, but please remember the, and it's great. Of course, it's great, and it was historic. But it's not like there were thousands of people at Crozer. There was 24 who mainly voted for him in the class, and that should be noted. It's still an incredible feat, but even some of the people who went to seminary with King, they would say, well, it's not that big of a deal. We just all trusted him. That was how they felt. Temple Baptist, if I have that right here. So Temple Baptist is kind of a reflection in my view of how his father may have helped him get jobs around at these churches. He was very, very busy King, and his father had connections with National Baptist Convention and a lot of other preachers who lived in that area. And of course, he also knew Reverend Barber at the time. So King's father certainly helped his son get jobs around the Chester area, but I don't know if all of them can be credited to that. I think a lot of it also had to do with a young King trying to get new experience. So this is Temple Baptist Church. Okay. Here Edward Street is a street I didn't really give enough, well, I didn't have enough space for in the book, but this is the street where King spent a lot of his time. And St. Daniel's United Methodist Church was one place where he preached on Young People's Day again. As you can see, King did like those opportunities very much, and also the preachers of the churches did too, because it was a chance for a new voice, younger than them, to directly communicate with the youth of the church. April 15th is 3 weeks before graduation. He is about to go back south and teach for his father at Ebenezer. But on April 15th, he was also taking classes with Kenneth Smith, who we might show a video later about. And Kenneth Smith helped King start to see the differences between Reinhold Niebuhr and Walter Rauschenbusch. And these are two philosophers, and they had different belief systems that King was drawn to. Rauschenbusch was far more into the social gospel, whereas Niebuhr was someone who was a bit more tempered and wanted more of a balance, but it was also very critical. So between Rauschenbusch and Niebuhr, King started to develop his own belief in personalism. And all of this is going around in King's mind as he's preaching at places such as St. Daniel's. So he's weighing these concepts, trying to understand what it is that he wants to believe going forward, and also speaking to congregations all across the Chester area. Yeah, these images are quite stretched, so again, I apologize if they look a little crazy. All right. My second favorite, I had to put this in, my apologies. It breaks from the theme of the talk. But I have been trying to get Overbrook Educational Center's attention for a long time, and they just won't listen to a crazy writer living in Japan. I don't get it. This is up in Overbrook, about 12 miles away from the old main building. And Martin Luther King Jr. played one basketball game on record, and he played here on January 11th, 1951, and he scored 3 points. And on this same day, before that game, he received an acceptance letter to go to Boston University. So that was a good day for him, but unfortunately for him, they were destroyed by this team, Eastern Baptist, okay, their rival. They lost 104-41, which was quite a bad score. You can see right here, this is King's name. King, he was a guard, and he scored 3 points. And all of these names I looked up, I cannot tell you how many spelling errors are in this box score. Yeah, I'd say over a dozen. But they've all been confirmed, and at this time, King was the oldest of this group, and he was a student body president still, and he did many of these things. He had quite a social life. I think it was in the gymnasium here of Overbrook Educational Center where he played basketball, his one moment of college basketball. Here is another kind of blurry photo. I think this is a debut, Susan. This is a color debut of this. This photo is in the book, but with the wonderful help of Deacon Mirtha Allen at Providence Baptist Church, which is Reverend Marcus Garvey Wood's church, she was able to colorize this photo, which this photo Marcus Wood passed away last year at the age of 99, but I was able to talk to the Reverend Wood about this photo, and he was able to tell me who everybody was. Of course, you can probably see King here, and these, unfortunately, that image didn't come out well, but that's Horace Whitaker, that's Cyril Pyle, and this is King's best friend, who I haven't had a chance to talk about, and that's Walter McCall. And they got into all sorts of trouble. It was King's idea to wear scarlet hoods during graduation. He wanted he wanted it to feel more like a master's degree, and he asked very strongly to the dean, Charles Batten, if they could have financed these scarlet hoods so that it's symbolic of theology. And there's 12 there. These are international students. Makoto Sakurabayashi is from Japan, and Chin Lin is from China. And this is Marcus Wood here, who you could argue saved King's life in his first year at Crozer, when a student who was very angry at King after a prank went wrong pointed a gun at King. And it was Reverend Wood who was able to calm down that situation and help bridge a gap between the two. And yeah, this is a historic photo here. This is also Joseph Kirkland. He was also a preacher in the Philadelphia area. So that's May 8th, 1951. And I thought I'd end with this. This is a picture that was too expensive for the book. I'll say that. But I love it because this is it's one thing that gets ignored, is that King often spoke with his mother quite a bit. And his mother often sent King a $5 weekly allowance in the mail, which helped him not have to have a part-time job like many of the other students. Sounds good, eh? So King was commonly caught by his peers talking to his mother for sometimes an hour every other day. That happened quite a bit in Boston during his Boston years, which I'm looking into as well. So this is King and his mother. Okay.
As leader of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, Dr. Martin Luther King changed the history of this country. The impact of his courage and actions were felt throughout the world. Today, Pennsylvanians whose lives were touched by Dr. King remember the young seminary student who was to become one of this century's greatest heroes.
I think the major thing I remember about Martin as a student in my classes was his deep concentration on what was being said and his penetrating questions. King was always waiting for me when I came to class, and he was always dressed in a suit, white shirt, and a tie, and his shoes were shiny. And it took him a long time to loosen up. During his senior year, he was elected president of the student body, the first black president of the student body ever at Crozer.
Baba called him just like his son. The most of the young black ministers were coming and go to Crozer they would always send them to Reverend Barber, because Reverend Barber had got his divinity degree from over at Crozer. So they would send him to Calvary, and they would practice preaching on us all the time. Well, we enjoyed it.
He stood tall, but he was not tall. And when he spoke, I mean, these walls vibrated just because of his speech. And I can say, I was young and I'll never forget it.
He was so full of life. I had never before known anybody that alive. And he was as turned on about religious ideas and philosophy as people are about prize fights. And the discussions that he and my father would have were just absolutely enthralling. I used to just sit and listen.
Quiet. Maybe some thought he was aloof in the beginning, but once a topic was introduced that was dear to his heart, and that was about equality. He was always about all mankind. He wasn't just concerned about black people. He was concerned about all people.
When he came to Crozer, he was a biblical literalist. He believed the Bible word for word. When he left Crozer, he could no longer believe that. So it sort of shook him up. And a lot of other things that he learned at Crozer shook him up, and he reoriented his whole pattern of thinking theologically as a result of the experience at Crozer.
So a lot of things happened to Martin Luther King in this town. He learned how to preach here. He became a mature, serious person in Chester and in this church.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, that was a couple of the dates were off there. 1946 to 1951 is 1948, but no matter. It's such an incredible thing that we're able to have Kenneth Smith on that video, because I believe less than a year later he passed. So that was yeah, his nickname was Snuffy too. He was well loved by his by the fellow seminarians, but that's what I have. I guess if there's, we'll wait for questions a little bit later, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So I also want to point out that Patrick's second book, which is entitled 1 Week in America, the 1968 Notre Dame Literary Festival and a Changing Nation, will be released on March 2nd, 2021. And that Patrick's work has appeared in newspapers and magazines around the world. His nonfiction is focused mainly on the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but he's also written extensively about Japan, as well as various biographical portraits of historical figures such as James Baldwin, Kurt Vonnegut, Ralph Ellison, and Kato Shidzui. I hope I pronounced that properly. So thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing with us. It's very interesting to see all of these local connections. While we were working on this project, Kathy Moore, one of our library staff members, said to me, well, you know who else knows a lot about Martin Luther King's time at Calvary? The Reverend Keith Dickens. And so we also have him with us tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He serves as the senior pastor of the Parkside United Methodist Church in Camden, New Jersey, right across the river there. He was born in Bridgeton, and he holds a degree from Grambling. And he went to Palmer Theological Seminary at Eastern University. So he actually went to that rival seminary. I don't know if they still played, or if they were still playing basketball when you were there, Keith, or not. He was selected in 2009 to complete his 2-year theological field education or internship at the historic Calvary Baptist Church in Chester. So he, in essence, served in the same role that Martin Luther King did as an intern at Calvary Baptist, and he was also ordained by Calvary Baptist Church. So Keith, welcome so much. and we're looking forward to what you have to share with us this evening.
Thank you, Susan and Patrick. Wonderful presentation. And Patrick, I just want to say to you, outstanding job with the seminarian. It was very rich, and it gave us a picture of Dr. King that was so desperately needed. And so I just want to thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you as well. So I just wanted to say thank you again, Susan, and thank you, Kathy, for giving me this time to share a little bit about Calvary Baptist Church and Dr. J. Pius Barber and Martin Luther King Jr. I think as we celebrate his 92nd birthday this year, I think that there's a lot of talk about King each year around this time by politicians and others alike that want to talk about his civil rights leadership. Yes, he was a great civil rights leader, icon, a civil rights icon, and masterful orator. But beyond all of that, first and foremost for me, and this is where I take great pride in, is the fact that he was a Black Baptist minister. He was a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he came from a long tradition of ministers. And Patrick pointed this out in his book, The Seminarian. I say all the time, I don't believe it was by accident that he ended up in Chester, because of his long-standing relationship, the family's relationship, maternal relationship that went back to his maternal grandfather, Adam Daniel Williams. Reverend Adam Daniel Williams was the senior pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, and he served as pastor from 1894 until 1930. So Reverend Williams was the pastor there for 36 years. He was succeeded by Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., AKA Daddy King. And Daddy King pastored there for 44 years, from 1931 to 1975. And then, but the relationship with A.D. Williams, Reverend Williams and Dr. Barber, his family, they were, Dr. Barber's father and A.D. Williams were very close friends. And so, and Daddy King was this strong, very strong figure, very strong and forward and very forthright figure in with his family and with the King family, just like many Black men at that time and even today want to be protective of their families. And it was a sort of a tough love, and but it was love, and it was a love that was desperately needed. And so Daddy King had a say in what Martin was doing and where he was going. And but one thing I remember talking to C.T. Vivian, and he said Daddy King had his grip and had his hand on Martin all of his life. He controlled where Martin was going to go. It wasn't by accident that he came to Calvary or to Chester and was with Dr. Barber. But December 1st, 1955, Daddy King had no control over that. And but his Heavenly Father had control over that, had a say in what was going on December 1st in 1955, when Rosa Parks decided that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired, to borrow the line from Fannie Lou Hamer. But Dr. Barber, a lot of the, when I came to Calvary, I was just humbled by the fact that I was standing in my mind on hallowed ground. Calvary Baptist Church was the spiritual home and training ground for so many seminarians, and in large part due to Dr. J. Pius Barber, a brilliant academic mind, a great pastor and preacher who loved seminarians. There was, when I was at Patrick, when I was at Palmer Theological Seminary, which was formerly Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary. I did a lot of study in the library in the Black theology section, which was dedicated to Dr. J. Pius Barber. And there was this picture of Dr. Barber in the library that was there. And I was like, who is this man with these wireless monocled glasses and with this suit, three-piece suit and everything? It looks very intimidating. He looks very intimidating. So Dr. Barber was a strong figure, much like Daddy King. And so when I talked to Nina Barber, Dr. Barber's daughter, I asked her about the various ministers that came through Calvary. And I asked her about Samuel DeWitt Proctor. These are big names, huge names. And Dr. Proctor actually, after leaving, he was there. He came to Crozer first before Dr. King, and the church that he belonged to was Calvary Baptist Church. And he was mentored, and he was a son of the church. He was mentored by Reverend Dr. J. Pius Barber, who's actually buried on the side of the church. His tomb is right there on the side of the church. And so, but Dr. Proctor actually, after leaving Calvary, he went on to Boston University. And so King actually followed in Dr. Proctor's steps. And so Dr. Proctor also became the president of Virginia Union and North Carolina A&T, and he also succeeded Adam Clayton Powell Jr. as the senior pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church. So many different parts and tentacles that come out of Calvary Baptist Church and Dr. Barber. The pastor that's at Abyssinian Baptist Church now, Calvin Butts, was an intern under Dr. Proctor. Also, Dr. McMickle, Marvin McMickle, who just retired from Crozer Rochester Theological Seminary, Divinity School, also was spent time as an intern there under Dr. Proctor, who was mentored again by Reverend Dr. J. Pius Barber. But there's so many names. Even when we think about even Kamala Harris, her pastor is the Reverend Dr. Amos C. Brown, who's a son of Calvary Baptist Church. He's the pastor of Third Baptist Church in San Francisco. And there were so many seminarians that were coming in and that were coming through Crozer, Amos Brown, J. Wendell Mapson, Dr. Mapson at Monumental Baptist Church in Philadelphia, the late Charles E. Booth, Walter McCall, Levi Baldwin, Earl Talbert, John Scott, Horace Whitaker. There were so many seminarians that were coming through Crozer, Black seminarians coming through Crozer, and were making their way over to Barber's Parlor, Barber University, 1614 West 2nd Street. And I've had a chance to actually eat in that home, and Sister Marie Carson, who passed away a few years ago, lived in the home, and so she would invite my family and I over for dinners and so forth. So we were very pleased and blessed to be in Dr. Barber's home, where a lot of the seminarians actually came in and they would practice preaching in front of a mirror. And Dr. Barber would say, "Preach, and take those $20 words that they're giving you at the seminary and break them down so our people can understand what you're saying. Make it plain, right?" And so in your book, Mr. Parr, you said often when we find ourselves outside of our comfort zone, we gravitate back toward the familiar. I found that very, very true, because Calvary Baptist Church provided the training ground. And it was home away from home for many of the ministers, including Mike King, in which a lot of them called him Mike, or ML King, which was his name before his father changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr. But I also There's so many, there's so much to say about Dr. King and Dr. Barber and the relationship that Calvary Baptist Church had with the academy. When I got there, it was just a tradition, a continual tradition of the academy and the church helping preachers preach and hone our skills and learn how to pastor God's people. And so it wasn't out of the ordinary. When I found out I was coming to Calvary, I was like overjoyed because of that, because I knew the history of this great church. It's not a big church, but a small church, much like Ebenezer was in Atlanta for Dr. King. The worship style was the same. It was more considered a dignified worship. Wasn't a lot of shouting or hallelujahs in the church. It was maybe waving a white handkerchief or something like that, saying it, but amen was not something that was done quite often, but it's more dignified in worship and more in that regard. And Ebenezer was just like that. And then when he leaves, when he left Calvary, he goes to Boston to 12th Baptist Church, where Reverend William Hester was the pastor there. And again, pretty much same type of worship. And then he's called to Dexter, and that same type of worship as well down in Montgomery, Alabama, where the pastor that he succeeded was the Reverend Dr. Vernon Johns. So I don't know. There's so much more. I don't know what else you want me to say, but I could talk a lot about Dr. King and the relationship between Dr. Barber and Dr. King. But it was more when I remember talking to Amanita Barber. She said that I said, how was your father with the seminarians that came through? And I was just giving them names, and I said, what about Dr. King? She said, oh, Mike. And she laughed. She said, I didn't really know his name. She jokingly said, I didn't really know his name for a long time. I thought his name was Boy, because Reverend Barber would say, come here, boy. And because he was just a kid. He was only 19 years old when he came to Chester and when he came to Calvary. And I asked him what about Dr. Proctor? And she fell out laughing. She said, Sam, Dr. Sam lost his father at an early age. And he always, out of all of the seminarians, Sam wanted to please my father, it seemed like the most. And so a lot of them became bigger names than Dr. Barber after they left Calvary and left Crozer and left Calvary, became bigger names. And like Sam Proctor, and he came back, Proctor came back, when the story goes that Proctor came back to Calvary, and it was for afternoon service, and he made his way over to the parsonage, and Dr. Barber walked in and said, okay, Sam, get in front of the mirror to practice preaching. And she said, Sam threw a fit. He said, I don't have to do that anymore. I have a PhD. And so she said, her father said, oh, okay, and walked away. But just imagine this figure, this giant of a man, personality with an intellect that was just off the charts, and was pastoring at Calvary Baptist Church. He was the first, Dr. Barber was the first Black to graduate from Crozer. And so, he was also a member of the National Baptist Convention's executive board. And he was an editor for the National Baptist, The Voice, for many, many years. So you had a lot of Black ministers around the country reading his editorials in the Baptist Voice. So he was known, he was well known, and a lot of the ministers wanted to have that connection with this brilliant mind that Dr. Barber had, and his influence was great. And so his friends, Dr. Barber's friends, were people like Marshall Shepard Sr. at Mount Olivet in Philadelphia, and the late great Gardner C. Taylor. These were his contemporaries and his friends. And so a lot of these students got a chance to interact meet some of these giants in ministry. Sandy Ray out of Cornerstone in Brooklyn also was one of the contemporaries as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and we'll have some Q&A time. So if there are some more questions that folks have, you'll have an opportunity to ask them. If we had been in any of those sermon development and delivery classes that Dr. Kuyten was teaching of Martin Luther, or if we were at Barber University along with Martin Luther, we would know that sermons need application and conclusions to end. And so I would like to just leave you with a few thoughts before we go to Q&A. King's friend, Marcus Wood, whom Patrick referenced earlier, had this to say, and this is from the chapter 9 in the Seminarian. There were many verses not in the index, King's index, that he had learned by heart. Marcus Wood remembered ML's continued fascination with the prophets of the 8th century. King was often heard in his room reciting the famous passage from Amos. King saw himself as an Amos to the society in which he lived. As a reformer, he too would have turned our nation upside down, Wood said. And you're probably familiar with those verses from Amos chapter 5, but let judgment run down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Have to admit, the English teacher in me says, where's the subject in that sentence? Who are the doers that are letting this judgment run down? In the context of that chapter, God's telling his people, I really don't want your hollow rituals. Instead, I want you to do this. So you are supposed to be the people who are letting judgment run down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. And if we turn a few pages further along in the Old Testament, we'll get to another prophet, Micah. And I think he gives us a much clearer view. He hath showed you, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. In 1968, Mahalia Jackson released an album entitled Mahalia Jackson Sings the Best Loved Hymns of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So as we end this time and move into the Q&A tonight, I want to leave you with the words to one of Mahalia's songs that she sang on that album. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody that he's traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a good man ought, if I can bring back beauty to a world upwrought, if I can spread love's message as the master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. So we are so happy and pleased that you joined us tonight. And thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you so much, Keith, for what you shared with us. I'm going to stop the recording, but we can hang around for a little bit if you want to unmute and ask some questions, or if you'd rather put them in the chat, then I can field those as well.